everyone. Welcome to the Landmark. Thank you all for being here. My name is Amanda Kowalczyk. I am the Manager of Community Affairs here at the Landmark Theater. I'd like to welcome you all, the folks that are here with us tonight, and also all of those live streaming at home. I am very happy that you're here. I know this evening is going to be a special event, and I'd like to thank you. This event is part of our Conversations from Main Street series and is sponsored by the Angela and Scott Jagger Foundation. Angela is here with us this evening, so a very special thank you to Angela. Our hope for this evening is to bring our community together to have a meaningful discussion about something that affects all of us, but not everyone talks about, our mental health. We hope the adults in the room can come away from this night with a clear understanding of how they can support the young people in their lives. And we hope that the preteens and teens in the audience will walk away with ideas on how they can better support themselves, their friends, and their friends in keeping their minds healthy. I'd like to share with you a quote from the actress Glenn Close. She says, "What mental health needs is more sunlight, more candor, and more unashamed conversation." And that's what we're here for tonight. With that in mind, we will begin our evening with a song from Dear Evan Hansen. If any of you have seen this musical, you know that it tackles themes such as anxiety, social pressures, and being true to ourselves. We will have the pleasure of hearing Sophie Sobel, a talented Weber 7th grader, sing for us this evening. After Sophie's performance, I will hand the mic over to our incredible moderator, Amanda Perez-Leder, and our 4 esteemed panelists for us to begin our conversation. You can read about each of their impressive bios in the handout you received when you walked in. Once again, I am very, very happy to have you all here. Thank you for coming, and now please let's give a warm welcome to Sophie Sobel.
I've learned to slam on the brake before I even turn the key, before I make the mistake, before I lead with the worst of me. Give them no reason to stare, no slipping up if you slip away. So I got nothing to share. No, I've got nothing to say. Step out of the sun if you keep getting burned. Step out of the sun because you've learned, On the outside, always looking in, will I ever be more than I've always been? 'Cause I'm tapping on the glass, waving through a window. I try to speak, but nobody can hear, so I wait around for an answer to appear while I'm watching people pass, waving through a window. Can anybody see? Is anybody waving back at me? We start with stars in our eyes. We start believing that we belong, but every sun doesn't rise, and no one tells you where you went wrong. Step out of the sun if you keep getting burned. Step out of the sun because you've learned, On the outside, always looking in, will I ever be more than I've always been? 'Cause I'm tapping on the glass, waving through a window. I try to speak, but nobody can hear, so I wait around for an answer to appear while I'm watching people pass, waving through a window. Can anybody see? Is anybody waving back at me? When you're falling in a forest and there's nobody around, do you ever really crash or even make a sound? When you're falling in a forest and there's nobody around, do you ever really crash or even make a sound? When you're falling in a forest and there's nobody around, do you ever really crash or even make a sound? When you're falling in a forest and there's nobody around, do you ever really crash or even make a sound? Did I even make a sound? Did I even make a sound? It's like I never made a sound. On the outside, always looking in. Will I ever be more than I've always been? 'Cause I'm tapping on the glass, waving through a window. I try to speak, but nobody can hear, so I wait around for an answer to appear while I'm watching people pass, waving through a window. Can anybody see? Is anybody waving back at me? Is anybody waving? Waving, waving, whoa, whoa.
Thank you, Sophie. Let's give her another round. Wow. So honored to follow that performance. Beautiful and inspiring. And that song was very intentional why we chose that song. If you were following the words, right, it really matches the purpose of our event tonight, right? And that is, like the other Amanda shared, tonight is about community building and conversation around teen mental health. And like the song suggests, our hope is that no one, especially no young person in our community, ever feels so persistently alone and that they don't belong, right? And when the occasional feelings of sadness and loneliness and anxiety and stress arise, that there is a larger and broader community, right? That supports nurturing ways for young people, right, to cope and navigate hard emotions. And that there is a big community of supportive and caring adults that are also equipped to best support them. So thank you, Sophie, for starting with that beautiful emotive song that, again, grounds us in our purpose tonight. So my name is Amanda Perez-Leder. I am honored to facilitate another conversation from Main Street with my esteemed panelists. So in addition to the song being very intentional, our design for tonight is very intentional. So let me just take you through a few points. Tonight is a conversation, like I've already said, a conversation between our esteemed panelists and you, the audience, made up of caring adults, parents, caregivers, school professionals, preteens and teens. So we haven't just squeezed 5 minutes at the end of tonight for Q&A, right? We have an intentional points throughout the agenda where you will, as audience members, we welcome your questions, your comments, and your ideas. So here's how it's gonna go. So our esteemed panelists will answer for all of us based on their perspective and professional and personal experience, what they think is most harmful to teen mental health in this moment, right? And then we will hear from you, the audience. We're gonna hear your reactions and your feedback and your questions after that presentation. And then they're also gonna answer for all of us what they feel is most supportive and most protective when it comes to teen mental health. And then again, we will have you engage as audience members with your questions and reactions. And then we actually have somewhere around 8:20, 8:30 an interactive activity planned where we are going to form small groups in the audience, make some new friends, and you're gonna answer together some thoughts and wishes on what we can collectively do in this community to help ensure that more of our teens feel supported and have strong teen mental health. And then we have some survey themes Anyone in the audience fill out a survey? I wouldn't know because it was anonymous, right? But over 20 of young people in our community, across our community, filled out an anonymous teen health survey, mental health survey, and themes from that survey will be incorporated into tonight's discussion. So that is what you can expect and look forward to in our next roughly hour and a half to 2 hours together. How does that sound? Thumbs up if that sounds good. Great, good. And then just some group agreements. If I have any other fellow, I'm sure I do, educators and trainers in the audience, right? We do group agreements to really help ensure that the space tonight, right, is what we call a brave and an inclusive learning space, right? So a few group agreements. Is anyone familiar with the jargon giraffe? I see Hilda is, yes. All right, let's do a fun little trial. Ready? So this is the jargon giraffe. You take the bottom half of your arm, you lift it up, and then you make like a motion like this, like you're talking, right? So this is the jargon giraffe. And what happens when you get a STEAM panelist sometimes up on a stage is we're gonna use jargon and terminology and acronyms, right? And we don't want that, we don't want that to minimize any inclusion and learning that's happening in the audience. And sometimes, I know, I see some fellow public health professionals, there's therapists in the audience, so maybe an audience member will use jargon without realizing it. So at any point, put up your hand, use the jargon giraffe, and that just kind of stops where we are, and it creates a learning opportunity so that we, again, explain the jargon, the terminology, the acronym that's being used, so that we all stay on top of the conversation, okay? Jargon giraffe. It was used a few times last time, right, Hilda? Yeah. And then the second one is just about being mindful of what is shared. Of course, we want to hear your perspectives and your experiences, and we also want you to be mindful of what is shared and that caring language is used. So if you talk about any of your own personal or professional experiences, just make sure that we actually cite behaviors and not individual people. Does that make sense? Right? And another group agreement that Lori shared backstage that I think is really great. Does anyone know what I mean by person-first language? Anyone know what this means? Gabby, you've got the mic. Do you want to give us an example of what person-first language is? This is just another way to, again, model caring language. You're on.
What a lot of people tend to do when they either talking about themselves or someone else who is struggling with some sort of mental illness or like physical disability or like mental disability, is that they characterize themselves as the disability before them as a person. So a lot of people say like, oh, like she's a depressed person, rather than saying what is more mindful, like people living with, saying like this person's living with depression rather than saying this is a depressed person. Or if it was like autism, like people tend to like just immediately go to this is an autistic person rather than saying this person has autism. So instead of characterizing the person as their disability, it puts that person first and then describes them rather than describing the person as their disability.
Make sense? Great. So another way, again, to model caring language in our comments and questions and conversation today. And this third one, this is really kind of more to just signal that if I see someone who has their hand up, right, for a second, third, or fourth time, and they're really eager, I may not call on you. It's not because I don't think you're brilliant. It's because I see a new hand that's being raised, right? So want to try to hear from as many diverse voices tonight as possible, right? So we can just be mindful of, taking up too much of the mic and making sure that we create room for new voices to enter the conversation. Okay, so go back for 1 second, Sean. I like to kind of see like a consent. How do these group agreements feel for everyone? Thumbs up if they feel good for you. Awesome, I love a room full of thumbs up. Great, thank you. Next one, Sean. So we probably have used the term team mental health, right, 20 times tonight, and it's just 7:20. So the panelists and I and Amanda, we want to just make sure that we're all on the same page, right? When we use this term tonight, right? So we're thinking of teen mental health. We actually really like the World Health Organization definition of mental health, right? So we invite you to consider mental health tonight as a state of mental well-being, right? That enables people, and certainly young people, to cope with the stresses of life, right? The daily stresses of life, right? Mental health is not ignoring that stresses happen. It's really understanding that they happen all the time, and mental health is the ability to cope with that, right? When we think about mental health today, we want to think about how young people, mental health allows them to realize their abilities and talents to the fullest potential, right? That they're able to engage in school and learn well and work and contribute and engage with their community, right? Because too often many of us are seeing in the mental health profession, right, that sometimes mental health is kind of deemed someone that's always happy all the time, right? You're always happy, you're relaxed, you're never sad, and that's not what we're talking about, right? Lisa D'Amour, an author and psychologist, talks about this, right, and says that mental health is absolutely about having feelings that fit the moment, including, right, feelings that are responding to stress, that are painful, right, that are unwanted, but it's about how they're managed, right? So mental health, strong mental health is not the absence of loneliness and sadness and anxiety, but it's about how they are effectively managed in effective and non-harmful ways, right? So again, that's guiding our discussion and our presentations this evening. And then last, before we really jump into the panel, one more slide, Sean. So there has been a flurry, right? Who's noticed a lot of articles and headlines in the last few months around teen mental health, right? Absolutely. So just wanted to highlight a few of them, right? So for other researchers and professionals, public health professionals in the room, you're very familiar with the Youth Risk Behavior Survey, right? So this is a very robust and well-known data survey. They just released their latest survey back in February. And it really highlights, right, the troubled state of teen mental health in this country. The survey, reported record high numbers of high schoolers experiencing persistent, all right? So persistent, that's different from the prior slide when we talked about the occasional sadness and loneliness and stress that can accompany strong mental health. This is persistent feelings, right? Also record high numbers of young people that have considered suicide. When we look at this data and they disaggregate by race, by ethnicity, by gender, and by sexual orientation, there are disparities, right? So we see that girls, students of color, and LGBTQ youth are struggling the most, particularly in in-school settings. That being said, we do see that since the last large-scale survey, that boys and teens across every racial and ethnic group are experiencing worsening symptoms. So maybe we can take a collective breath as we kind of absorb that. And then in just the last month, maybe you've seen these two headlines. One was just last week. We had the APA and the Surgeon General's office really raise alarm bells, new alarm bells, about the profound risk of harm, right, that social media can bring to many young people, right? So here's why we're sharing this. We're sharing this for 3 reasons, right? One is that when we see attention, when we see media headlines capturing this, it means that enough people are finally paying attention, right? That this is getting more attention that's maybe ever been given around teen mental health and the troubled state it's in. And oftentimes what follows that are new policy recommendations and more resources, right? So that's potentially good news. Another reason why we're sharing it is you'll receive a follow-up email later this week. You'll have links to all of these surveys and reports. And with all of these, they also have really, really concrete tips on how parents and school administrators and teachers can actually enact some new actions, policies and practices to actually meet this urgent demand. And then lastly, we're sharing this because it's a lot of writing, it's a lot of reading, and it really begs some supplemental conversation and problem solving, and that's what we're doing tonight, right? So who's ready to get to it? Let's get to it. All right, next slide. So like I said, we're gonna have each of the panelists respond based on their professional expertise to this question, what harms mental health? We're gonna start with Lori Zlotoff to my immediate left. Lori has a social work practice here in town. She is a very well-known resource in our community. In addition to her social work practice, she also has a ton of therapeutic experience via her long-standing commitment to summer camp, where she also provides mental health services every summer up in the Poconos. So Lori, why don't you kick it off?
Thank you, Amanda. It's so nice to see so many familiar faces in the audience, particularly my colleagues, so thank you so much for being here tonight. I know that for much of what we're going to share, this is preaching to the choir, and I really appreciate that everyone in this room is here because this is the first step in dismantling the stigma of mental health, because we're here to talk about it. I imagine that many of you are here because you're parents as well, and you worry about your kids. I do every day. And so I want to start by saying, and I think we hear this a lot, the kids are okay, right? We don't have to be panicking at this point in the presentation, but we do want to be really mindful. And the things that we as parents or we as community members or grandparents or educators need to be aware of is when mental health struggles persist and when they interfere with our ability to live our daily life, to function. And for our kids, that means school and healthy relationships, sleep, and good diet, and many more things. But when we think about what harms our mental health, and this is for ourselves as well as for our kids, that's sort of universal, it's the persistent feeling of a lack of self-worth and believing that you don't deserve to feel better, believing that you deserve to be treated poorly, that lack of self-confidence really is at the root, I think, of so many people who struggle with mental health because they don't have a sense that they believe that they should or get to feel better or that they're allowed to feel better. And where that is drawn from comes from a variety of triggers. It can come from family relationships, parents who tell their kids that they aren't measuring up or that they're not meeting expectations. It can come from peer relationships where a child might be bullied for their identity of who they are. It could come from living in a society where cancel culture is a widely accepted way of dealing with people who make a mistake. That there is no room in our society to make a mistake or have an error in judgment without being canceled for it and the fear of what that might bring. We live at a time right now where everybody is under massive scrutiny because everyone lives their life, not just IRL in real life, but also on the screens. And the perception that you are being judged every day, not just walking down the hall, but on people's phones and on their computer screens as you put yourself out there is horrifying when you really think about that. And our kids are struggling to figure out who they are amidst all of that pressure. I imagine, and I see this in my practice all the time, that when kids come in feeling this way, they feel like they're the only one. And they feel like there's something wrong with them or that they're different. And one of the best things that we can do for kids is to teach them that this is normal, right? It is normal to feel doubt and insecure, and that many, many people feel that way. Even the people who look like they've got it all together are struggling inside, and we should expect that we're going to struggle. Nobody should be perfect. Nobody should be expected to be perfect. And when we can accept that we will make mistakes and struggle, then we don't have to criticize and be so harsh on ourselves when we struggle, because it's all part of the human experience. I think that I'm going to let my colleagues talk a little bit more about social media. I think that maybe that's Gabby's wheelhouse a little bit, because she's a real teenager. I just pretend to be one sometimes. I will end with this. I think that, and we talk about this at sleepaway camp all the time when kids are homesick, is that the feeling of discomfort when you're homesick feels so intolerable that the only way to solve it is to go home, right? And what I try to teach kids there, and I teach kids in my practice, is that our capacity for managing discomfort is vast, and that we can do hard things. Anyone listen to Glennon Doyle? Yep. We all can do hard things, and we can do much more than we think we can do and that we give ourselves credit for. And if we can practice being uncomfortable and staying in the discomfort, we learn our capacity for being able to manage that and face the next stressor. I think I'll stop there.
Nice. Thank you, Lori. Thank you. So Gabby is going to build on that answer. Gabby is a Shriver senior off to Wesleyan University, woohoo, in the fall. A student leader, volunteers on a crisis. She's a crisis counselor, and is also a athlete as well, right? Tennis and badminton team? Awesome. And we're thrilled to have her on this panel.
Thank you. So I'm gonna go more in depth about social media, because I know like social media can be really good in some ways, like what was just mentioned with like the crisis counseling. I found out about that through social media, but so there's always good things to everything. But I think in regards to how social media harms teens right now, a lot of people know that everything they see on social media is not always real. Like there's Photoshop, and there's people record themselves at a certain point of time, so you don't see any of the other things that happen except for that one good moment. So what people tend to do is, and they're not they kind of are forced to compare themselves to unrealistic standards of like, why don't I look like that? Why don't I behave like that? Why isn't my life as rainbow and like sunshine as what I'm seeing on social media? But it's because it's not real, and also it's still kind of out of your own control to be able to turn that off and understand that even though like it's not real, it still makes people upset. So I think that's a huge thing on social media. And also now everything that teens especially do gets posted on Instagram. Like whether, not everyone has to, just as long as one person posts it, it's there. So that's kind of always a sad thing for someone who's getting excluded, because before social media was such a thing, people could just exclude someone, which is not good in itself. But you don't really find out. But now, if you're not included in something, you have to watch and look at all the pictures and look at what everyone else is doing that you weren't invited to, which is kind of devastating if you have all your friends who just kind of leave you out, and you have to sit and watch the posts over and over again. And even with especially in this town, bar and bat mitzvahs, people post all the time. And it can be really sad when everybody gets invited to a bat mitzvah and you have to look at hundreds and hundreds of posts from everyone and all your friends, and you weren't invited. It's real, and that doesn't make you feel good inside either. And also, I'm thinking TikTok specifically. I've seen a lot of posts that are for lack of better words, they normalize ineffective and unhealthy behaviors, giving you strategy. I've seen a video that said this is a really great strategy to hurt yourself more than usual, not more than usual, but this is how to do it effectively. And again, in a sense, social media can be really good, but in that situation, it should kids are just forced kind of, because the social norms of you have to be updated and caught up on all of like the trends. And so with that comes, there's a couple posts that are not so great and that kind of can give some teens some ideas of some not so healthy situations. Also in regards to like, kind of like leading off of the whole social thing, like the pandemic was like tragic for like socially, in the sense that people lost their entire like middle school experience, which doesn't really seem like a huge thing, but that's a huge time of like social development that teens just, because right now, if you like go back and do the math, like the 9th graders like didn't really get their their middle school experience. And from that, there was a lot of isolation, and then you're coming into a new school with people that you haven't seen in 3 years, and you're kind of just thrown into that environment and expected to survive and to do well with kind of no fallback. Like, you go, you have to sit through your classes, and if you weren't good about like maintaining all of your relationships, you're kind of just stuck alone. And then also, I think a huge thing in this community specifically is like Port Washington's a really beautiful place to live. And I think a lot of people, or at least like in my own experience, like a lot of people feel that because they're growing up in such a nice and privileged way and they have access to so much, they kind of feel that they're too privileged to have mental illnesses, or like they feel that because I have everything, because I like am growing up in such a fantastic situation, I don't deserve to feel sad. I don't deserve to have like mental struggles, even though a lot of times like mental illnesses are like from inside rather than like external like environment. So I also think that's a huge thing. I think I'm gonna leave it there.
Thank you, Gabby, for those provocative thoughts. And we'll have, again, we'll have an opportunity to respond and to ask questions and comments about any of these particular gems of wisdom. So we're gonna pass the mic to Dr. Vera Foyer, who is a child and adolescent psychiatrist, has been working at Northwell for over 13 years in a private practice, in emergency room settings, and most recently spearheading some incredible school health programs. So welcome.
Thank you so much, and thank you for having me, and thank you guys so much for starting this conversation off so well and bringing up some of these really difficult aspects that we're talking about. To continue some of the themes, I mean, I do think that whether it's through social media and the skewed perception, as Gabby was describing, or whether it's because of expectations from home or from our social environments, we do live in a culture of striving for perfection, right? We have a lot of pressure on ourselves as parents, as professionals, and on our kids to perform, to look good, to be healthy, to have time for self-care, to do well in school, to have a lot of friends, to kind of do it all. And that's a lot. It's a lot of pressure, and that strive for perfection can create some barriers to kids taking on risks. And taking on risks and going out on a ledge and trying things you've never tried before, risking something that will maybe be a negative experience, are crucial for kids to be able to experience that they can overcome difficulty, that they can do hard things. Mm-hmm. That's where growth really happens. And having this growth mindset, right, which the educators in the room very, very familiar with the growth mindset, really important, because as parents will often be in today's age, we're often too protective of our kids, trying to, again, going back to what Amanda said in the beginning, have this vision of mental health is when everything's really positive and there's no negativity, and we clear out all the difficulty from in front of our kids. And I feel that does harm teen mental health, because it doesn't allow kids the opportunities to develop in a way that then will help set them up to be resilient in life, which is what we really need them to be. So really not being given these opportunities to be to be more independent and learn from mistakes and navigate stresses, I think is important. Another thing that I will mention is that social media and technology doesn't only impact the way Gabby was talking about, it also makes us even more sedentary. And that lifestyle for our kids, physically, mentally, really, and for ourselves, let's be honest, and for ourselves, really difficult to navigate that. And as the Surgeon General says, you know, the really difficult thing about social media and technology, it's not a fair fight because they got the greatest minds, created all these platforms that drive use, that make everybody want to use it even more, and they pitted it against teen brains and children's brains that are not ready to handle that. We're not ready to handle that. Adults are having difficulty managing it and curbing their use, let alone kids. And so that results in many areas of difficulty because whatever time you spend with that is time lost from other things. And the other things include physical play, being outdoors, having physical activity. It includes connections, real life connections, not just over the screen. Research tells us that social media has great aspects, and it certainly can do a lot of good if used well and if kids are ready to use it well and independently. But it also has inherent risks, and we gotta be able to, understand that. And, adults in kids' lives are really, really important. So whatever stresses out adults, which is a lot these days, impacts on the kids. So how we manage our stresses, how we model, how we cope, what kind of examples we set with connections, relationships, our own, phone usage, technology use, and how we manage difficulties in our lives, I think is another really important thing. And I'll stop there.
Thanks, Vera. Awesome. Great. Next, we have Lori Director, who is another very local resource. Lori is the Director of Guidance at the Port Washington School District. I just learned, and is also a Port Schools alum herself, and certainly can speak to some very local observations given her role in our school district.
Good evening, everyone. We're on, okay. Thank you for having me this evening, and I've really enjoyed hearing the rest of my colleagues up here. And wow, I mean, the wealth of knowledge that we have on this stage is incredible. So I'll talk a little bit this evening about what we're seeing in the schools and from the school district perspective, which I think will resonate with everybody here. I love that we have a real cross-generational, intergenerational audience here of community members, parents, students, and professionals, because this is a topic that impacts everybody. So as a district, certainly we see and know the trends, and I will say that the statistics that we've spoken of we really are seeing those things. But to echo my colleague Lori down the couch, the kids are all right. By and large, the kids are all right. The students are okay. We are here to support them. And when they're not feeling all right, it's really our job to allow them to have a safe space with a professional and a trusted adult in their school to discuss what's happening. But what harms our students' mental health?
Next slide.
So I will try to summarize and encapsulate some of these, but just thinking so much about what we've been talking about here, and just to expand a bit, in thinking about this topic, and my colleague Dr. Foyer just brought this up. I think about the developing adolescent mind, and as anyone who is surrounded by young people and teens, I mean, our adolescents are a super intellectual and charming and engaging bunch, and yet their minds are still developing. So it's very easy, and to my young people who are sitting out here, you know, that's one of the great miracles that we have, is that we keep learning and growing, and us adults too, we keep learning and growing. But when we look at adolescent development, the truth is that, yes, minds are still developing through their teenage years. So some of the warnings and the reality about what's now being reported on social media, it's really time for us to think and continue these conversations. So that's one of a large focus of my work, is just really putting that information out there and getting it as part of the conversation, so that faculty and parents and students understand that this is what's happening. So when I speak about what harms mental health, and certainly over the last 3 years of a pandemic, it's impossible not to think of the trauma that some have experienced. And the toughest thing about trauma is that it's unknown, it's silent, it's opaque. We don't know what people bring in to their school, their work environments, their professional lives each and every day, and how those particular those situations impact a student. You know, we go back to, you know, the basic necessities, and we talk about just the foundation. We think about students that might not have had something to eat. Well, schools, we provide meals every single day. We have breakfast for students. We have lunch for students. So we've got that. We can provide food and meals, and every student has access to that. When we think about mental health, and that description that the World Health Organization uses really is, it completely encapsulates what this is, that state of well-being, and that idea that it's okay. It's okay for students and for adults, quite frankly, to have a day where it's okay to say, you know, I'm feeling stressed, I'm feeling sad today, you know, it's okay. We all have days like that, and to be able to put that out there in the conversation, you know, I think about when I walk into Schreiber every single day, and how wonderful and lucky I am to have this great office in this great thriving building with 1,600, almost 50 students, and wonderful caring faculty. And what do? We walk in the building every day. Hi, how are you? Oh, I'm good, I'm great, I'm good. And that's what we do, and that's okay. But, you know, truthfully, there are times when I might walk in and say, oh, well, you know, I'm great. But, you know, I might say, oh, you know, might have had an argument with one of my kids, or I might have, you know, or the dog didn't cooperate, or, you know, some silly things, but there could also be some heavy things. But that's sort of sometimes what we put out there. It's just part of our general culture. But what we're doing here, we want to do with teenagers and young people, is to say, sometimes it's okay to let us know when you need to talk to somebody. It's important to know who those trusted adults are. So just as I wrap up what I'm saying, what would really harm students' mental health is maybe not having, or that idea of knowing, who's your trusted adult outside of your home. Mm-hmm. There's always somebody. It could be a teacher, it could be a counselor, a social worker, it could be an assistant principal or the principal, it could be the school nurse or custodian. I could go on and on. So I would say not knowing who your trusted people are, that really harms our students.
Thanks, Lori. Next slide, please. So before I turn it over to some questions and thoughts from the audience, one more, go back one. So again, I said that we would reference the teen survey, the anonymous teen survey that was sent out about 2 weeks ago. Really want to honor those teen voices that participated. And again, it's just interesting to hear, right, like from our panelists, what they feel and their experience is most harmful, and then what our teens reported that completed the survey. I looked at the themes. The academic stress, the schoolwork really was quite, it rose to the top. That was very, very evident. So again, different ways of wording the idea of too much schoolwork and testing and those demands. Not enough sleep, right? And what we know is that that could be part of too much schoolwork. What else could it be a part of? Social media, right? We know that social media, a lot of it happens up until like right before bedtime. Do we know what that blue light does to our brains? It tricks our brains into not making melatonin, right? It's wild, right? So literally, it's harder to fall asleep, adults and young people, if you're literally looking at your phone up until bedtime, right? Different variations of this idea of mean people and teachers came up. Being too busy, not feeling like there's enough time to recharge, unwind, do a hobby that can kind of help me with some discomfort. Number 5, also very important, reminds me of something I've talked to you about with Lori and Gabby, which, is perhaps some of us are here as parents and we're thinking, okay, like my kid seems okay. And that doesn't necessarily mean that they're not worried or supporting a friend or a peer that's suffering, right? So oftentimes, that's a part of this equation as well. So, and that came up in the survey, right? So it made a young person reflect on, well, maybe I'm okay, but I'm really suffering from the fact that my good friend is suffering or harming themselves. So we now have a few minutes before we move on to the next question around what's protective and what supports strong mental health, for you to just ask any questions or comments, reactions, anything you lovingly want to challenge about what you heard. Hi, so Amanda will either bring over the mic or you can step forward. Allison has a question here.
Hello, thank you all for being here and for your presentation so far. So I guess this is more at Lori, Director for the school district. I have a sister who's a guidance counselor in the city schools and whose kids also go there, and I find that what our schools as a district and as the schools themselves are not that progressive in terms of how we handle and the conversations, and I find that having the entire grade come in for an assembly rather than doing smaller groups and really getting into it with them so there's more of an understanding, as well as the pressure that's put on by the teachers. I mean, if you're in an honors class, there are teachers in your freshman year in high school that are looking to weed you out. And that does not help if a kid is struggling just a tiny bit. For other areas, the schoolwork is definitely a piece. So I'm just seeing, like, what is on the horizon potentially with our district to actually take some of this data and really take it seriously and put some things into action that's realistic. Thank you.
That's an excellent question that I don't know if I'll be able to give you a complete answer tonight, but just, no, none taken. I mean, this is an important topic, and it's something we speak about all the time. So school counselors, just so you know, if anybody's wondering, well, what do you do? What are, why school counselors? And school counselors really do focus on the all. We are generalists, and we focus on all students. And so the conversations, and just so you know, we as an entity in 2019-20 received our first ever regulations, and we all know what happened in the 2019-20 school year. So we are kind of regrouping and getting back out there and in there. This was really our first, if you'll forgive the word normal, but our first back to pre-pandemic. So we are constantly speaking about and advocating for our counseling delivery, our students. And then there's some of the realities, so we'll keep having those conversations and learning how to deliver what we do to all students. So within the confines of the school day, right, we have to have instruction, and we have to have, so teachers have to do what they have to do. we have to do what we have to do. We are looking at certain practices. We have committees that go on all year long, and some of them, and that's where, you know, I sit on these committees and I say, yes, I agree, I understand, I agree, I understand. Now let's look at this from here. Here we are, all students, you know, let's be sure that we're inclusive here, and let's be sure that we don't have any barriers. So we certainly have a lot to learn and grow, and if you ever wanted to continue this conversation, I'd be happy to set up a time to talk more with you about it. But please do know that these conversations, we speak all the time about what we can continue to do.
Lori, as you regroup and think about kind of how to put those regulations into effect, are any of those committees, are they open to parent input, community input? Are they, you know, how often do they meet? Just in case there's interest in the audience.
So I would say, I mean, we have, so the internal committees, let's say just for right now, I'm thinking our grading committee, and it's just a panel of district stakeholders within, you know, faculty, administration, and there might even be some assistants on there. So things like that, but topics could come, let's say, at a board meeting if somebody wanted to discuss a topic during the public comments. But certain committees that come up, you know, there are possibilities and pathways and avenues, and I would say, you know, possibly one of your HSAs, or we have one PTA in the district, could be a pathway. But
Okay, thank you. Vera, I wonder if you have thoughts on just kind of what a progressive school district looks like right now that's really handling kind of mental health issues head on, just because you've been working with several.
Yeah, so I mean, I have a couple comments. I think that one thing that I was going to say is that your question is really excellent about how to, it really is a big dilemma and something we talk about with our school staff every single meeting that we have with our school counselors and administrators when we talk about issues, is how to balance the demands that we have, that the curriculum has, that New York State has, that we as parents have, expectations for what the schools, especially in high-performing districts like yours, you know, there's a lot of pressure from the community on how we perform and how the students perform, and how do we balance that with balancing for mental health and hearing what the kids are saying, that not enough sleep and the academic stress is what's crushing them. And that's what they said when I went to Roslyn, to the mental health club that the students created, exact same things they said as in this survey, exact same issues that they're bringing up. And it's a really difficult balance, especially now post-pandemic, where we are dealing with catching kids up with learning, with development. I mean, Gabby highlighted, you know, how some kids miss their entire middle school experience. Well, some kids are coming to kindergarten not potty trained. I mean, it's really the impact of the pandemic at the different developmental stages on the students has been really extensive. And schools are busy trying to figure out how to pull it all together, how to catch them up while supporting them, while giving access to care, navigating what the world that I live in, very complicated, very deficient, shall we say, mental health care system that we try to, you know, connect people with care in. If you've ever tried to connect with care, not an easy thing to do. Takes a long time, probably takes a lot of money, all of those things, and a lot of trial and error, finding the right and a good provider. So really, really complex, and schools really are trying to balance all of that. And what is a progressive, I mean, I've seen, districts do amazing things all across Long Island, the districts that we're working with. I'll highlight the Oceanside Wellness Center just because I'm
Please tell us about that.
Obsessed with what they've done. They this year had some grant funding to create this wellness center in their school, which is a physical space, is beautiful, but that's not really even the point. What they did is have a full-time psychologist who creates programming for parents and students, a lot of student input, from the fact that the students designed the logo of the center, the marketing class created things that they're selling for funding their events. I mean, it's really, really nice to see how well utilized it is and how it has become a place of connection, a place of engaging the community, which is what we're talking about tonight, is that sense of community, that connectedness. And that, for example, is an initiative that really connected kids in that high school and for that district. So just one example, but so many amazing programs all over.
Thank you, Vera. Is there another, yes?
First of all, I'm so impressed with everybody up there, and Gabby, I think you're going to be a remarkable therapist. I really love the way that you presented tonight. It was very thoughtful and to the point. I'm excited for you.
Bravo.
So I have a number of questions, but the one that I think will be different than some of the others might be, one of the things that I've been struggling with is how does a parent, or for that matter, a therapist, successfully implement mindfulness practices such as time in nature, meditation, yoga, journaling, and creative pursuits, things that are not on screens. How do we get our kids excited about those things, and how do we get those things valued? And I will say one thing I have found, and then is I want to just give a plug to scouting, particularly in Port Washington, the Girl Scouts, the Boy Scouts, which is also now open to girls. It's a remarkable opportunity. It's social, it's outside, it's making a difference. So I just wanted to throw that one community aspect in there. But how do we get our kids excited and motivated to do mindful practices?
Well, excited and motivated feels like a very tall bar. Let's just start with like participatory and interested. You know, your question reminds me so much of what family values are, right? And I think that we would all agree that we certainly can't ask our kids to do anything that we're not willing to do. We can't tell them to put their phones away at the dinner table if we have our phones at the dinner table. We have to be good models. So much of what you shared, I believe, starts with parental role modeling. If you use that lovely list that you just gave as ways to breathe and spend time with one another and take breaks from work and stress and screens, then the likelihood of your children doing that too is so much greater because you're role modeling it in your house. And they may protest because that's what they're supposed to do, right? They're teenagers after all, but they'll like it secretly. They might not tell you, but they might secretly like it. And then what you're doing is building their capacity for being able to do that on their own when they leave your house. And they, call you one day and say, I'm out for a walk because I needed a break. And I wanted the sun, and I wanted to be in nature. And then you're going to say, oh, I did my job well, because that's what they're choosing for themselves. Making it punitive, telling them to put their phones down so that we can do something is going to create resistance. So it needs to be a balance, right? Everything's a balance.
Go ahead, Vera.
Yeah, I will add, and I'm curious to hear Gabby's thoughts on how to get kids excited about this. But I will add that I completely agree. Modeling small habits, just setting aside some time, and then if they do something, and connecting the feeling that follows afterwards, and having them recognize how it made them feel after, because that is what's gonna sort of build the next time. Last time it really helped, and my son will say things like that. I have an 11-year-old now, but when he was, go on a walk, and he's like, you know what? Yeah, I do feel a little bit better after. So really helping make those connections, I think, helps drive habits further. Gabby?
Anything you want to add, Gabby? No pressure.
No, I totally agree with. I also think it's important when getting teens or kids or just any young person to do some sort of mindfulness activity, it has to be catered to their interests. So for me, I have a severe hatred of hiking. I don't know what it is. The idea of walking up a mountain just to go back down just doesn't make any sense to me.
And it's my jam. That's what I do.
But for me, I'm gonna talk more about this in the next question. But I'm really into crafts. I like to make bracelets and anything with my hands. And so for me, like, that's my mindfulness thing. So like, instead of being outside with nature, or I could do that outside, but like, instead of like playing with nature, I get to like, to me, like, I think it has to be catered to each specific person and each specific child and their needs and their like interests.
Beautiful.
Absolutely, and mindfulness is really that just being able to be in the moment, right? It's being able to stay in that moment, whatever engages you and occupies you. And I make the joke, it's not all yoga and, aromatherapy baths. For some people, it's jumping out of airplanes or making bracelets.
That's a great segue, actually, because Gabby, you're up next for the next question. So we've heard about some of the most significant harms and impediments to mental health. Now let's spend some time thinking about what most helps and supports. So Gabby, we start with you.
Hi again. So for me,
Next slide.
yeah, I can do this slide. So this is an incredible resource that I discovered honestly on TikTok. It's the most incredible use of technology I've ever experienced, and I'm a crisis counselor where like I got trained, but it's basically a hotline. It's like the calling crisis hotline that you can call, but this one's texting. So if you don't want to like speak to someone on the phone, you can do it from your phone and like text it. And it's free and it's available 24/7 for short-term support to like help to get someone any age from a hot moment to a cool and calm moment, and to ensure their safety. And it's just like, it's incredible. Like, as someone behind the scenes of it, it's the whole thing. Like, people are just there, and all the counselors want to be there. Everyone's really excited. It's a really warm and like fuzzy group of people. And no matter who you have, is like, because you get assigned a random one, everyone is like so passionate.
Gabby, what's an example of why someone would call the hotline?
Honestly, for anything. It could be that someone's having urges to hurt themselves, or it could be they're in a fight with their friend and they don't know what to do. And like I've had situations ranging from I'm bored to having like just way more severe, or like people who are in some really dangerous situations. So it's really anyone and any age. I've had 8-year-olds and I've had like 85-year-olds.
Thank you.
But yeah, it could be for anything. And then
Next slide.
then like I said, those are bracelets that I make. But for me, crafts are a huge outlet for like when I'm stressed. I have a craft room at my house. That was my present for getting into college. And it's my room of just everything, because I like things. I like to have things. So it's my room of things. So depending on and that little one in the bottom corner, that's a diamond painting. I had to Google that because it was hard to find a picture. But it's like painting by numbers with like little plastic diamond things. It's fantastic. But depending on my like obsession of the moment, I have a whole room that for me is super, super helpful when I'm overwhelmed, when school is stressful. Because also, I meant to mention this before, school, like as someone who went through the whole Schreiber, like the Washington School District, it's incredibly difficult. Like, it's difficult if you make it difficult. If you're taking the honors and APs, it's going to be hard. And it's a really incredibly stressful environment of like, oh, I like didn't do well on this test, I'm not gonna get into college. Like, I promise you're gonna get into college. But it's just, and like, with the teachers, like I totally get it. Like it's really hard. And I think after the pandemic, I've noticed a really severe, because I had a situation where I was out of school for a couple weeks, and when I got back, my teachers were super, super compassionate and gave me a lot of time to make up everything. Or even some of my teachers like some of my AP teachers excuse tests for me. So I think that aside from 9th grade, because I'm just like honors bio, and those are brutal. And I think it's honestly like, I think those specific teachers and like personalities are just, they're not in the realm of, I'm like, I want to help you, because it is a weed out class, because that starts the track of honors. So when like it's like that's the one, more people drop out of that class than anything else. But yeah, so back to crafts. Yeah, crafts are my thing. And taking time for yourself is really, really important. So sometimes I've noticed where I'll make plans with friends and I'm just like mentally not there. So, and I felt guilty, and I feel like sometimes you'll feel like it's rude to cancel on them, but it's also you need to prioritize yourself sometimes and acknowledge and accept the fact that like it's okay. Like I'm not there today, so I'm allowed to take a day and to relax and not have to like be social because my social battery ran out. And yeah, I think I'll end it there.
Great. Thank you for those really concrete, tangible tips. And who wants to go visit our craft room? And I think, Lori, your slide is up, so why don't you take that? Okay. And then, yeah, go for it.
Thank you. So, thank you, Gabby. It's kind of hard to follow Gabby here, but very well done. So what supports and protects students' mental health? This sounds easy, but establishing healthy boundaries, and what does that mean when you're a young person? What really does that mean? But, we're talking about the social media, and for our young people, really, yes, it's natural to resist, but your parents really do have your best intentions if they say, hey, social media, phone down at whatever time that is. Those boundaries are there to protect you. And ways that you can protect your own boundaries, let's say with friends, that's a very brave thing to do too. But, that goes back to those conversations maybe that you would have at home with your family. And
I feel like,
Yes.
Gabby just gave us a really
Yeah,
nice, healthy
exactly.
boundary, right? With that conversation, like, I'm just not up for it today.
Exactly. and
Right? My
that's-
batteries ran out, right? Like,
Yes.
that's an example of, right, giving
Yes.
each other permission in your peer group,
Yes.
right, to socialize that sort of language.
So, and speaking of giving permission, so at Port Washington schools, we have adopted the ruler approach. I don't know if anybody here is familiar with Dr.
Anyone
Mark
familiar?
Brackett
The
and
ruler
his work.
approach?
Okay, are you a Sousa student? Were you a Sousa? Okay, so we adopted ruler, I want to say 9 years ago at Sousa, and it's really built and blossomed to something truly wonderful that is at varying stages in all of our elementary schools, and hoping to spiral that back up. But what ruler stands for is recognizing, understanding, labeling, expressing, and regulating, and it's an approach for emotional intelligence to give students the language. It's really meant for pre-K to 8th grade, but can be appropriate for the upper grades. And the idea is to give students the appropriate language to label and understand their emotions and to build empathy. So how do we support? Well, we're giving students the permission, and Dr. Mark Brackett's book, Permission to Feel, really is exactly that. And we found, the culture of those buildings and creating a safe space for students to come in to say, hey, my battery's run out. How are you? Where are you in the mood meter? Well, kind of in a blue, didn't sleep well, battery ran out. So that's definitely something that we work on in our schools. And again, going back to that feeling engaged, and we've talked about that, so students feeling engaged with community. We talked about that with regard to scouting and other, the question that we had a few moments ago about, well, what do we do to feel engaged? Well, Gabby talks about she's engaged with her crafts. She's certainly engaged socially, but knows her limits and her boundaries. And how many of us as adults feel that pressure too? And it's hard to, I'm going to wave both hands high, knowing when my own cup is depleted and when I need to put on the proverbial oxygen mask, because I can't be my best self unless I'm taking care. So those things, and helping our young people need our support and our guidance to identify what those things are. It's really, really hard to navigate this world and this terrain thinking back to when we were teens, it was hard. Now, let's amplify that. That's how difficult it is for our students. And in my less than 1 minute, I will also say embracing a positive mindset, which we talked about, growth mindset, positive. I am not, though, referring to do not diminish your own feelings if maybe you're not feeling so happy in that particular moment. Doesn't mean we walk around proverbially happy every single day, but if we take that attitude that we know we'll be okay, we're going to be okay, that's that positive mindset.
Thanks, Lori. Is anyone else wondering, like, when can Ruler get spread to more schools? Right? Is there a plan for that?
There is a plan the district talks about, as we kind of spiral that up, and there have been pieces that's been introduced at Weber and at Schreiber, but it's really exciting for those students and parents who've kind of learned and gone through it.
We were talking backstage about just the power of just having accessible shared language to talk about hard things, like with something like Ruler, like a way to just check in and say, like, here's where I am today without judgment. It really helps in like the pickup and adaptability, right? When the language is so shared that it's part of the school's culture. No one's gonna look at you weird if you actually use some of that language, right? So, and for mental health, it's great. It's literally a way to break down the stigma on saying you're having a bad day, on saying you need a new boundary, right? So that'll be, we'll talk more about that. I'd love to hear more about how we can potentially partner. Maybe there's some interested folks in the room on how we could, build more of that throughout the district. Kira.
Yeah, and it is a great approach, and the shared language is so important, and I think it really does allow people, when we normalize, stress impacts everybody, and we all have different levels of it every day, and Rule really helps with that, with the common language and recognizing that, these things build up, and then there's things we can do to bring the level down and decompress. And another thing with the growth mindset, I really like the expression, the power of yet. We don't know it yet, just yet, right? There's room to grow. There's room to build on. So I think that's really important. And to refer back to the earlier referenced YRBS, the Youth Risk Behavioral Survey, this year they had 2 new elements on the survey, which is looking at some protective factors for kids. What are things that are protective for our kids? We know a lot about the risks and a lot of the negative things, and 2 really important things that are time and time again are found to be protective for all the categories on that mental health survey is school connectedness. So feeling connected to our school community, and schools do a lot of things to help promote school connectedness. Every school picnic and concert and event and parent academy and bingo night really helps promote, hopefully, that sense of community. And kids feeling like they have a space to go, they have a safe space, they have a safe person. We talked about trusted adults earlier. So schools have a huge, huge important role in protecting kids. And families, of course, families is the other one, right? Parental monitoring is the question on the survey. And kids that responded that they have high level of parental monitoring, that their parents know about their life, about some details. I forget the specific language and the way the questions
They know where they are and who they're with.
They know where they are, who they're with. Those kids fare better in all categories under mental health. So I think really what helps is these things: family support, engaged parenting, right? Like, you don't have to be perfect. Even as parents, we put so much pressure on ourselves to be perfect. We don't have to be perfect. We have to be good enough. There's no perfect parent. You gotta make me, you have no idea how many times in my brain as a child psychiatrist, I'm like, uh-oh. I shouldn't have said that. But
Do-over, the power of the do-over.
The do-over and the yet. And really, but engaged parenting and working together with our kids and integrating their voice. So, even with social media, it's not about, no, you can't do it. It's about, how is it going to affect you? How can I teach you to do it safely? Just like with everything else in your life that I'm hoping to prepare you to be independent, how can I prepare you for it? How can I teach you what the pitfalls are? How can I teach you how it impacts you? How can I be there with that? And then I have one other category that I mean, it came up before under the harms, and the teens brought it up, sleep. I mean, really, sleep, not enough sleep. Kids need to sleep more. We probably need to sleep more. Really an important factor, and it really does have clear evidence on impact on mood and anxiety and our overall cognitive functioning, and how well and clearly we can think, and how impulsive we are. All of those things get impacted. And then, as you can imagine, those things then impact your school performance, your peer interactions, your parental interactions, and it's all can be a quite vicious circle if you don't address it and really just focus on having enough sleep. And being healthy in general. We talked about nutrition and movement. They all have really important roles in being healthy and well-rounded. And then, as Gabby said, whether it's through bracelets or an art and craft room, whether it's movement, dance, music, whatever it is, expressing yourself, being able to find a creative outlet and an outlet where you can, again, just take your mind off of the past and the present and stay in the moment and get engaged with that. That's what mindfulness is. We all need it every day.
Absolutely. Thank you, Vera.
It's
Lori.
hard going last because everybody said everything I want to say. So ditto to all of that. And I want to leave with this message, which is that in order for kids and adults to feel like they matter and that they have a purpose, they need to have a sense of agency. Agency means that they know how to do things and they can take care of things and you can trust them to do things. So it starts when they're really small, right, with giving them little tasks. Empty the dishwasher. It's not just useful for the household, but it teaches kids that they have worth, that they're helpful, that they can do things. And that sense of agency is something that you can build on, because ultimately what you want your kids to know is that they can handle things on their own and that you believe that they can. So,
Including difficult chores. I'm not looking at my daughter right now.
especially difficult chores, but particularly when it comes to mental health, that our kids get a sense of confidence from us, that they know that we know that they can do it, and that we are their biggest cheerleader. And so when we try to jump in with the fix, because it's so in our nature to want to just fix things for our kids and make them all better, we're actually robbing them of the opportunity to do it themselves and to learn that they can and that they should and that they will then in the future. And so the suggestion as for the parent is to pause before you jump in with the fix and just take a breath and validate back what you hear. Because most of the time, your child just needs to know that you hear them. They don't want the answers from you. They want to know from you that you believe that they can do it.
And isn't there physiological data, right, that just by actually talking about the difficult emotion, right, sharing it with a caring adult, it begins the de-escalation process.
That's such a good segue into my visual aid. So thank you, Amanda. So one of my clients gave me permission to bring this in and share it with you. She's a 10-year-old I've been working with since September. And she came up with these quotes. I'm going to read them too because they're a little far away. From my experience, talking helps me because while you talk, sometimes you can make yourself feel better when you're upset. When I first heard I was getting meds, I got really scared because it was something new. But I soon realized there was nothing to be afraid of, and the meds changed my life for the better. And the last one, sometimes people think therapy is a bad thing, but it's not. Everyone has problems, and therapy helps you solve them with help.
Nice, beautiful.
Yay.
I'll just add that I've learned this from my children because I would jump to the problem solving. And sometimes I'll actually ask, right? I'll ask, do you want me to listen? Just listen? Or do you want to talk about solutions, right? So there's agency, right? And they kind of direct what they need most from me, as opposed to me jumping. That's been helpful for us. So there's a moment for more exchange with the audience. Next slide, please. But let me show you next slide. Oh, this is just a fun visual. Again, goes back to that question. Just we can send this out. We can send out the slide deck. We will send out the slide deck with the follow-up email. Next slide. So the teen survey, right? Going back to that teen survey of our local teens. So this is what they said, right? This is what emerged. These were the top 5. I will say with number 1, friends, family, and parents, friends were the most cited. Friends were the most cited. Again, and it follows the themes up here, right? That's kind of since the beginning of time, social connectedness is really good for our mental health, right? And I think sometimes what most harms it are the things that actually can interrupt that social connectedness, right? So again, I would just say family, friends, and parents were all cited, but friends, there was strong emphasis on friends. Spending times, relaxing, just hanging out with friends. A lot of people talked about music and other soothing hobbies that they go to, like art or getting on a bike, physical movement, sleep, right? Inadequate night's sleep. And then others mentioned the importance of therapy and/or medication in their lives as really being a facilitator of their mental health. So before we have our interactive activity, just want to create about 5 minutes or so to see if there are questions or comments, reactions, as we talked about these protective factors of mental health. Did anything come up for any of you? Anything you want to share? Maybe you want to share a strategy in your own life if you're a young person or a caring adult.
And Amanda, before we do that, we do have a question from one of our listeners at home who's live streaming. So I just wanted to honor that. She writes, the song that opened the program was about deep loneliness and not being heard or seen and feeling like you are being heard or seen. How is the district addressing this? Many kids are not comfortable reaching out to guidance. Is guidance looking for these kids? And what, if anything, is being done to help them?
Powerful. I want to also, right, so Lori obviously works for the district, but I want to open this up, right, to this is also an opportunity to problem solve. If there's things that either you've experienced in your family where you felt like someone was not being heard, was being overlooked, but something different was then done that was effective. Of course, anyone else on the couch in addition to Lori. I know you work for the district, Lori, but so just want to make room for others as well to offer suggestions as well. So do you want to respond though to kind of how is the district reaching the kids that don't feel comfortable, don't feel brave and safe, because all different reasons, haven't made that meaningful connection with a caring adult in the school district? How are we looking after those kids?
So, and that's a really important and powerful question. And I'm sure, we'll get phone calls, let's say, from parents. And that's where the parents as partners come in at times. And we might get a phone call from a parent who says, I know my child is struggling and they're not the type of student that will come and seek out the counselor. And then we will seek out that student. And if that student wants to speak to us, and that can be challenging because, if they're not comfortable, it's challenging. And then the best we can do is really, hey, I'm always here for you. We can have conversations about if there's something that's bothering you, or perhaps, your parent reached out to us. That is what we would call, say, an important but reactive approach. we're working towards getting to be more proactive in our delivery, which is really what we need to be doing. And unfortunately, like we said a few minutes ago, some of our proactive approaches were not as accessible during the pandemic. So when we were virtual, really, really hard to be proactive and have, we tried to do freshman groups through Zoom. It's very, very different.
Right now, what are some of those proactive approaches?
Some of those, so actually just today, yesterday, sat with the counselors, nope, sorry, it was today, and built our calendar for next year, and what are the things, okay, so when are we doing our delivery, when are we meeting, pulling our freshman groups in? So the idea is, we always start large. Again, counselors are, I'm gonna use a term here, tier 1 interventionists. So tier 1 is general. It's all the students. We deliver an intervention to every student. So when we do our group work, our freshman groups, our sophomore groups, so the idea is to start to build those relationships. We're starting with the 8th graders, and we went into meet with the 8th graders in their classrooms at Weber back in January. We will be meeting them again in June. I can't remember the exact date, but it's coming when the 8th graders are coming up to Schreiber. So starting to make an identification, and even though those 8th graders won't know at the time who their counselor will be yet, but they're starting to identify. Then we have our, we can go on and on about the different things that we do, starting out with that general intervention. But then as we build those connections, we start to see, okay, well, something doesn't seem right with this particular, I know this student, and I don't, it starts with the building of the relationships, which is something that we're able to get back to in a much better way now that the pandemic is over.
Seems like Lori and Vera want to jump in.
I would just add to that, as a private practice therapist, so many of my referrals come from the district. And so if a child doesn't feel comfortable speaking up to somebody in the school, sometimes just having somebody in the building make a referral is a great connector for a child then to get support outside of the building.
Yeah, and a lot of the times it's not necessarily the counselors that kids might come to. It's other adults in the districts. And for example, clubs tend to be places where kids might feel safe and connected. So that might be a good way to engage them and have them feel like they belong. And Gabby will tell us what else, hopefully, because she's lived it. But I think those are important opportunities for kids. And then training other kids, honestly, there's a lot of initiatives. I'll cite another program. Sources of Strength is a program that's a peer support program that really is all about having peers that are trained, that are helpful in noticing things, or having kids know that there's peer champions that they can go talk to. And it is about not just mental health, it's about and overall, they have like a whole wheel of wellness, and all the things we talked about today of what goes into wellness, Sources of Strength sort of helps address. But
Have you seen that in schools, Vera?
Yes, many schools utilize that approach. Some of the ruler approach, for example, which focuses on elementary kids, the Sources of Strength can be adjusted for elementary kids. It started out as a high school, more youth program. And there's other ones. I mean, there's really many programs out there that really help with that sort of concept of having peers, peer counselors, peer supports, folks that people can turn to. And then the other thing that we're doing in school programs is professional development, teaching teachers how to notice, how to recognize signs, more subtle signs of distress, how to identify, how to refer. That's also important.
Excellent. Gabby, did you want to mention one more thing?
Yeah, I just wanted to say, because in a sense, I think in some situations it's really, obvious when, a student, okay, I'm going to use myself as an example, because last year I had kind of a rough year. It was junior year, and, like I mentioned, I was out of school for a while, but before that, because I'm usually really bubbly, I sit front and center, I participate, and there was a very clear change. And so all of my teachers noticed. So I think it's difficult when a student is either really quiet or just kind of goes into the year on a low note, because it's hard to see a change unless it's a significant one. But I've noticed the health teachers at our school, because the 3 health teachers they're so amazing. But I've noticed this year that they like will stop the whole class, be like, "Oh, guys, talk about how your weekend went," and they'll really quietly pull a student into the hallway, and like who is sitting in the back with their head down, and talk to them and like make sure they're okay. Even students who went into the year on kind of a low note. So I think it also within the district, it's really hard for teachers to be able to do that. Like for like AP classes, it's hard to take time out of a period to, because also like with the whole like AP and everything, you teach to the book, and there's very limited time. You need to like work every period. So I think health classes I think is a really huge thing, just because the 3 teachers specifically I think are so aware and so well versed in like the mental health world. So I think it depends on like the situation and the circumstances.
And how we can actually, right, extrapolate that training that the health teachers have to others. And also let's commit as a community to talking more about this tension. I mean, what I'm hearing Gabby say is that an AP teacher, right, so worried about getting through the content, may see a student in distress and feel like they can't actually reach out to that student, right? Or pull them out of the classroom to just do a little quick check-in, right? Because of the demands of that curriculum. So I think, I imagine all of us are feeling a discomfort with that, right? So how we can continue this conversation, but so wonderful to hear, right, that the referrals come to Lori from the school district, that Gabby is seeing new ways that teachers are actually, again, noticing distress and doing something about it, professional development opportunities.
So I just want to expand upon that a little bit. And Gabby, thank you so much. I mean, I love hearing from all of our colleagues, but especially from you. It's so relevant. So speaking of professional development, and just, to kind of get back to, I think, your question earlier. So each year on our superintendent's conference days, there's always some sort of either training on inclusion or training on trauma-informed practices. I mean, these are regular occurrences that take place for district-wide faculty. So, and we do continue with those. Is there room to continue that? Absolutely. And getting back to the tension between the academics and the social-emotional health, well, it's frequent when a teacher sees or feels or thinks something, they'll come down and have a conversation. They'll start with the counselor, and we work in teams of our mental health team between our counselors, our social workers, our school psychologists, and I'll expand upon that to include our school nurses as well. We have a collective care team that includes all of the personnel in a tribe. We're also really lucky because our assistant principals really are involved in so much more than just discipline. They play an active role in their students' lives. So if a student felt that the assistant principal was their go-to person, that's perfectly acceptable at Schreiber. So we do take that team approach to meeting the students where they're at and where there's a need. So yes, it's a challenge when, a student might be quiet.
Sure.
And we don't know. So that's where, we rely on the partnerships with our parents.
Great. What a great question. Thank you, live stream participant. Amanda, do you want to say one thing?
I just wanted to add one thing that I learned when I was putting this event together, which is that the Schreiber High School actually has a student-run mental health awareness club, which I thought was amazing. It's called the Full Support, and maybe some folks in this room, students or parents, are unaware of this, and you can tell your student about it and find out more about it at the school. I think it's great to have a group of peers that will support you if you come to be a part of this club. I think that's a really nice support. So I just want to put that out there as well.
And the advisor is a health teacher.
Oh, nice. Good. Next slide.
Hi.
Oh, of course. Thank you. Angela Jaggard.
If I may, there's also a way of looking to nonprofits that are doing some interesting work in this area.
Nice.
We have the pleasure of also funding, that is the Jagger Foundation, an organization of not too many years yet, started by a parent who always felt very self-conscious, felt unable to engage in athletic kinds of things and so on, and thought to herself, well, wouldn't it be terrific if we could provide for girls an opportunity to say they could be successful? Well, what are they successful in? A triathlon, believe it or not. So now hundreds of girls are learning through professional coaches how to teach kids, by the way, are teaching kids how to swim, how to bike ride, and how to walk, a triathlon that they do once a year. They prepare for it.
Nice.
This is out in Suffolk County. And it is absolutely phenomenal. This year, they've added training for their coaches in mental health models
Nice.
that coaches are now using. And so if you're not comfortable in the school environment, start looking at what some of the nonprofits are doing. They are replacing a lot of services that schools have done in the past in a lot of different areas. So I would recommend that also, seeing what's available in the nonprofit world.
That's
That's exactly right. It's called I Try. I Try Girls.
great. That's actually a perfect segue to our next activity, which is really, we're trying to really tap in now to wishes, dreams, and ideas, right? As we think about, right, making mental health a reality for more of our young people, right? I want us to spend a little time finding just a few friends in the audience. Maybe you came with 2 or 3 people and maybe you want to stick with them. If you came alone, you can introduce yourself to someone, but ideally we form groups of 2 to 5 people sitting near each other. Amanda's bringing over a piece of paper for each group and a marker, and you're gonna have about 5 to 6 minutes of conversation, and you are going to just come up with a little bit of a list, right? And a few groups will share back, but based on what we heard, maybe you heard you're intrigued by what Vera said about what are some of the other school districts are doing, right? Maybe you're intrigued about these great health educators, right? And how we get more teachers in our district trained to really notice subtle signs of distress. Maybe you like Angela's comment, right? About nonprofits. Is there more money and resources that we can tap into by partnering with more nonprofits, locally and nationally? Maybe you want to do more of these conversations. We know we're just starting to have this conversation. There's so much more that we can expand upon. This sort of workshop activity, we normally would give this at least 20, 30 minutes. So we could benefit from more activities and conversations like this one. But go ahead and it seems like you're starting to get into little groups, maybe. And just jot down some notes. What could this community benefit from having more of? Margie had a hand, and Sophia, did you have your hand up before? It's related to this? Okay. Margie, did you have a thought before?
Yes, hi.
And then feel free to give us an idea when you're,
Well, yes, what intrigued me before,
oh, just wanna honor that Margie has the mic. If we can wrap up our small group conversation. I love it. I know I hate to cut off the good energy. We do need more time. Hopefully this is just the beginning and we can reconvene.
this says something about what you're all doing. It's great.
Well,
And people are
together,
really excited
all of
about
us.
it. Yes.
Thank
So
you, Margie.
Thank you all. Yes, I was, well, our group here, we were talking about the peer programs, and that was very interesting, and to know that, about the club. I'm a therapist as well in private practice. I know Lori. And so hi, it's Margie Kahn. But I was also, we were talking about kids that are lonely, and just thinking about, are there ways, or what ways to proactively work with kids who are lonely? Are there social help groups? Or I know there's a club that you mentioned, right, at the school. But so how do kids know about it? And are older kids sort of being there like big brother, big sister for younger kids? And then how do parents find out about it? And how do the kids find out about it? Is it listed on with the other clubs?
Okay. So
So
greater
it's out there.
publicity and awareness of the clubs and the resources that already exist.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. So that is our question.
Okay. Question or also perhaps wish, right? Because it sounds like, do we think every teen knows about this program?
Right. How is it accessible?
No.
How do they know?
Right.
And how can we get it out there more?
Okay, great.
Thank you.
So thank you. And we forgot to mention this, but definitely hold on to your list of wishes and ideas, because we actually want to take them all and write them all up, because these, again, the learning should leave this room. So these are some good ideas that you all have, and we want to make sure that they get captured by decision makers in our area. So another group, Edna's group.
So we have like multiple ideas,
Great.
but like one of, yeah, sure. So I'm gonna say my idea first. What's the first one on the list?
We're so happy you're sharing it.
So like I saw this thing, like I know like you guys were talking about like how like social media is like not great, but I actually did find like an idea on there to put on this list. So it was like this teacher, and she did like roses and thorns with her students, but it was like anonymous. So all of her students would put in like a rose and a thorn like on a Post-it, and she would read them all out loud to her class, but it would be anonymous. And so it would like the students would like realize like they weren't the only one dealing with like the problems that they thought they were like the only one dealing with, and like they were like sharing like all their thoughts and stuff, but like people didn't have to know it was like about them, so they felt, but they still felt heard, and people would like be like, oh, that's a good one, like I'm so sorry to hear this, like I saw one that was like it was really sad, but it was like somebody passed away and everyone was like, I'm so sorry to hear that, but like nobody knew who it was, so
But you didn't know who it was.
Targeted. Yeah.
Do we need a jargon giraffe for roses and thorns? Edna, can you describe what? I can help if you need help.
No, I got it.
Okay.
So roses and thorns is like, a rose is like the good part of your week. It's something that made you happy or made you feel excited, or just like it was just a great part of your week. But then a thorn would be something that wasn't so great, but that you still feel like sharing to like let it out.
Terrific. Beautiful description. Anything else you think? Yes, please.
Nobody wants to share.
Okay.
I love the creative use of social media, and I agree. I mean, it's not that it's all bad, and we have to engage you guys on how to use it, because it is part of our language and it's part of our day and it's part of our life, and we have to use it so that it helps, not harms. So it's a great way.
Sophia? What'd your group come up with?
I know from a friend living in Connecticut that each student in the Connecticut Public School District, like statewide, they're allowed two days each year to take a day off from school where they're excused from all schoolwork and everything that day because they feel that they can't go to school that day due to mental reasons or anything like that, and they're excused, and it's considered an excused absence. And the public school district is totally accepting of this, and they don't ask any questions, and they just accept it fully. And I think that's something that would be really helpful to bring to our district.
Nice. Great. A policy recommendation.
And our workplaces.
And workplaces, yeah. Beautiful. Is there another that a group wants to share? Yes. Our mindfulness and nature champion.
Working on it.
Aren't we all?
All right, we have a terrific group of 4 of us here with a lot of great ideas. One of the things we mentioned as wishes was training and resources for parents, which I kind of think might have just started tonight. So thank you all. Because sometimes we just don't really know the best approach to take or what resources are there. I love that idea. We also discussed acceptances and celebrations of different journeys to adulthoods. Not everyone is going to
Yes.
follow that same pathway come after graduation.
Success looks different for different people.
Right, and to be able to say, you know what, that's amazing, tell me more about what you're excited about, or find ways of celebrating the kids where they are, not necessarily sticking to our more traditional hierarchy. And in that, celebrating diversity of outcomes. Wishes for life skills workshops, which is one of the things actually I'm beginning to work on now. And then lastly, learning to partner with our kids about social media and wellness. Having discussions instead of saying, well, I'm taking away your phone because you didn't do X or Y or didn't do until your grades go up, but say, let's sit and talk. And how do you feel? Talk to me about how you feel would be a helpful way of improving this situation and getting an outcome. What kind of outcome do you want, and how can we help you achieve that? It's not necessarily everybody pile on the bad face on social media. As we discussed here, there's positives and there's negatives to it. But it's here to stay. So we need to figure out ways of partnering together in seeing that reality and how that's reflecting on our lives. It was a great group.
Beautiful. Panelists have any reactions to some of those? Gabby.
I just want to go back to the when you mentioned the celebrating whether you're going to work or college. It's interesting you said that because today we got a text from a remind thing from the seniors from our assistant principal asking us to fill out a form for the Shriver Times, our school newspaper, and it said, what are your plans after the school year? And it was very clear in parentheses, college, work, I thought that was really interesting because I noticed that today, and the fact that you just said that was weird. But they did.
For years, there's a whole section of the kids and what schools they're going to and their plans.
Yeah, that's why. Yeah, I think they're including the work too. That's why. That's
Work and
So we made a real strong concerted effort with the administration to work on a day. We did not celebrate May 1st as Commitment Day because it is Commitment Day. It also fell within APs, but we just had whatever the date was last Thursday. But last Thursday, all seniors were invited to the brand new, beautiful front entrance and steps to celebrate their pathway. And it was exactly whether you are going to college, whether you're going to career, whether you're going to the military, come and celebrate with your classmates and decorate and chalk the steps. It was Next Steps Day. We are working really hard at changing the language to be more inclusive. Yes.
It's really great.
Yes.
That just reminded me, I had a question that when I was in the school a couple of years ago, in the entrance, there's that bulletin board that you see, and the whole bulletin board was covered in rejection letters with the names blacked out. And I always wondered why. Why is that?
I'll
What is
tell
that
you
about?
why. That's part of another long, deeper conversation. So why? Oh boy, how do I shorten this? So.
And is the wall
because-
still there?
No, they're down, but we talked
Okay.
about revisiting this. So the landscape of college admissions is a topic for another day that I could go on and on and on. But there is a recording from a January curriculum committee meeting, should you be so inclined to look at that recording on the district website, where I discuss the current realities and what's going on. But the truth is, rejections are more and more and more due to the landscape of what's going on. But it was done sort of for students to sort of, again, create a common language around that experience of understanding that, hey, you're not the only one. There are so many of you that are getting rejected from these places that have such small acceptance rates to begin with, and how do we just support each other and our peers in doing so. I can explain more, but that was the gist of the rationale. I wasn't here for that. I'd have to, but I know, you mean the counselor, there was one or two particular that had orchestrated it, and however they did it, I mean, they blacked the lines out first, and then I guess put it on this particular board. But no, that's not there right now.
Okay. How about one more wish? Oh, Gabby, do you want to?
Yeah, no, I also just want to say, because like this year, I went through the whole college process, and like rejections, acceptances, just like it's been chaos, especially because like we're in like a predominantly privileged community, and like because of that, college-wise, it's not super helpful, because a lot of really top schools are going for minorities, which is fantastic. But being here, it's really frustrating, because you're watching kids who worked so hard, it just for no reason at all, with no explanation, just not work out. So I think in a sense, because I wasn't here for the rejection letters, but I also think like it was kind of a way of coping with it, because it's really frustrating. Like when you spend 4 years in high school, 3 years in middle school, like working your butt off, and then getting like just watching all of that kind of like slip away is like, it's really like painful. So I think in a way, like people accepted the fact that they did not get accepted, but also like I think it was a way for them to just finally be like it's over, and like it just didn't work.
And how do we, and also too, how do we honor, right? Like how do we honor, like you mentioned, right? More minorities, more non-white students are getting admitted into colleges. Maybe they're the first in their families, some from our district. And how do we actually celebrate that, as opposed to kind of create a competitive environment around that, right? I think that's an important nuance to the conversation as well.
And as it was mentioned, how do we celebrate all the other alternate paths that
And
you
that
could
too.
take and be
And that
happy
too.
and successful in life? Because that is, when we talk about the academic stress and how stressed the kids get, it's because you get convinced that the only pathway to happiness and success is through college, and through a competitive college at that. And when that's your only measure, that's a lot of pressure. That's a lot of pressure. So I think celebrating the alternate pathway that was mentioned, hugely important.
Yeah, and there was a lot of applause for that, the changes that are already happening. One more wish, and then we're going to wrap up with a really beautiful, actually, piece of technology. One more wish. Would love to hear one more wish. Gabby? Go ahead. Two, real quick. Gabby and Brenda.
Okay, so I was thinking that like each student could kind of get like a weekly check-in with like their teacher, or like a trusted like adult, like maybe just some like alone time to talk with them, like to talk about like their week and what they're looking forward to, and also like I'm pretty sure this was Keeney's idea, but like also some parents like feel like that they can't like afford a therapist for their kid, and maybe they like kind of feel bad about it, and also like maybe that can lead to stress, but also stress for the child too. Maybe feeling like oh, we can't afford this, and maybe it just feels like it's harder for them to talk about it with their friends, because maybe some people, when they can't afford certain things, they kind of get like embarrassed about it, and maybe like the person would be like, oh, I don't want to talk about it. Like,
But if a weekly check-in was offered
yeah, exactly.
and enough people participated, right?
It's also like good to talk about it with the person that's stressed. Maybe like they can help like create ways for them like to find affordable therapists, or even therapists that like even like not even like like just like a trusted adult in general. It doesn't even have to be a therapist.
Great, great. Love it. And then Brenda, these are amazing.
So something I'm thinking of, this might not, I'm trying to present it in the most positive way, but what if teachers periodically met to share positive ways of dealing with challenges that they all experience?
Sure.
I mean, I understand there's a lot on the teachers, everything that happened with the pandemic, and also dealing with the kids and how that affected them. But I've experienced, or my child's experienced, things through teachers in their stressful moments that I think the teachers also need a little bit of an education on how to handle difficult situations that they all encounter.
Sure.
And I think that kind of meeting and sharing ideas with someone, a leader like a psychologist, et cetera, engaging with them and saying, well, this child might be dealing with this or that, or I don't know, I'm not that psychologist.
Sure.
But I think the teachers need help with how, because if you have a student who's doing well, but that teacher's not treating that child well for whatever reason, that child is pulling back and is no longer doing his best because he feels beaten down.
And that echoes what we saw in the survey, right? I mean, some of the respondents said mean teachers. I think it could be frustrated, overwhelmed teachers that again need their own form of support, their own peer group, and some more awareness around. I also hear empathy in what you're saying, right? Helping teachers understand why certain students act the way they're acting, what they're going through. So any reactions to that panel?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. And, I think in the last 3 years, that has been even more pronounced because, as you can imagine, there's a lot of similarities with healthcare, actually, how schools had to completely rethink the way they functioned for a while, and teachers were learning new skills and figuring it out as the same as healthcare was trying to figure out how to manage this, unprecedented crisis on our hands. And it really shook everybody's sense of safety and everybody's sense of competence, which causes tremendous amount of stress. And you're absolutely right. Managing that stress for us in healthcare, as healthcare workers, and how we're supporting each other and how we're managing and how we're staying healthy so that we can provide good care to our patients is the same for teachers and school administrators, actually, because I was saying earlier, the amount of stress on school administrators in the last 3 years, always, I'm sure, but particularly in the last 3 years, it's just been really tremendous. And you're right, it all does trickle down to the kids, and it's really important to address.
Wonderful. Please have the mic.
Hi. I just wanted to add what Brenda suggested. We need maybe perhaps bring not-for-profit organizations into the school, like NAMI, National Alliance of Mental Illness. Many people don't know what that's all about, and maybe hold like a monthly meeting with young children throughout Weber and the high school to let them know that they're not alone. And how do you deal with stresses? How do you deal with crisis? And steer them in that right direction. Take them down that path and let them know that they're not alone and that there is hope for everybody out there. And I speak on that because I'm involved with NAMI, and I have struggled with my children going to Schreiber High School and what happened. And I can see what can happen when you don't have that path. Yeah. So the community needs to be more involved and aware of what's out there. And we need to start in the schools.
Thank you for that. Yep. And a plug for the Ed Foundation, right? That's a local group in town that offers grants to kind of fill the gaps, right? Where school is still figuring stuff out. Oftentimes it's financial gaps, right? And there's a lot of partnerships with nonprofits. And actually I had a conversation with the director, Sue, not too long ago, and she was a little disappointed this year. There weren't enough grants, actually. She would have loved to see more submissions next year. So again, I think that can be on our collective to-do list. How was? Oh, amazing.
And NAMI has it's a great plug for NAMI. They're wonderful. And NAMI has a lot of online resources. They run support groups for kids, for family members, for parents. They have workshops. They have a lot of amazing resources.
Super. So now what we're going to do is a little bit of a closing. I don't want to leave. I can see not many people have stood up to go, but we want to respect and honor your time. It is a little bit after 9. But this is a really tech-friendly and visual way to actually just get a pulse on how we're feeling at the end of this conversation, hopefully the first of many more. So has anyone ever done this? Create a word cloud from our phones? It's really fun. And for those of us who are educators and in our own workplaces, this is a really fun thing to do to, again, just get a visual evaluation of how your audience is feeling and what they're thinking. So the steps are, you should, if you're having Wi-Fi issues, the Wi-Fi is just Landmark Theater, no password. But you just go to menti.com on your phone, and there's going to be a little prompt for a code. There's that 8-digit code, 6441 5710. And then there's another prompt, and you fill in the answer to this question with one word. So what is one word to describe how you're feeling after tonight's conversation? How are you leaving the space with one word? And then now what we need to do is go to Menti.
Hit it, Sean. Yeah, everyone has a code.
And it's okay, we can slowly see it populate. Oh, it's coming in. That's real. Thanks for being real, frustrated. That's real. Maybe you're thinking there's more we could be doing. That's okay. That's real. Enlightened, optimistic, potential, educated, more, hopeful, inspired. So the words are bigger if more than one person submitted it. Heard, privileged, motivated. Oh, that's funny. Hopeful. There's hopeful with 2 L's and there's hopeful with 1 L. Say again? Yeah, frustrated. It's okay. That's real. That's important. Pensive. Yes, there's a lot to process.
Well, I just want to say thank you. I know we're a little bit over time, but I think this was a great night, and I can't thank you all enough for being here. Have a great evening. Thank you.